America. We are free, we are America.
Where we go on?
We are free, we are America.
Welcome to the 40,000 foot view. I'm your host, Sean Morgan. We're going to have a great show for you tonight because I really can't understate how important this trade war is with China. This is monumental. This is something that happens once in 100 years. The restructuring of a global economy, possibly the changing of a global reserve currency. We don't know what's going to happen. Things are changing on a day-to-day basis. Last week, we got to talk to Matthew Ehret, the editor of the Canadian Patriot Review, to discuss the decoupling with China, and he has written extensively about this subject and happens to know quite a bit about the history of China and the United States. And we will be going through more of that with him today, as well as discussing our relationship with Russia, because there are three great powers in the world, and how they choose to align could change everything. Let's start out by watching a video of Donald Trump talking about how he doesn't want the Chinese military to be getting much more funding. Let's take a look.
About all of the people that say, well, deficits, if we have a deficit with the country, or if the country has a big surplus with us, like China has a massive surplus, that they take and they spend on their military. Well, we don't want that. I don't want them to take $500, $600 billion a year and spend it on their military. I don't want them spending money on their military. And I shouldn't have to spend money. We shouldn't have to spend it either. Because, you know, hopefully, and I said this to President Xi, hopefully it's money that we're never going to use. In other words, because we're not going to use those incredible weapons that we have and that they have.
Yes, interesting how this really is not just about economics. It's about possible kinetic conflict with these great powers. Let's take a look at Secretary Pete Hegseth talking about taking back the Panama Canal from China.
China did not build this canal. China does not operate this canal. And China will not weaponize this canal. Together, we will take back the Panama Canal from China's influence. And we will do this along with other capable, like-minded allies and partners.
We've also heard from Secretary of the Treasury Bessent about how Spain, if they choose to ally with China, would be so-called cutting their own throat. Let's take a look.
In terms of escalation, unfortunately, the biggest offender in the global trading system is China, and they're the only country who's escalated. And I can tell the rest of the world that I'm not sure whether it was the Prime Minister or the Economic Minister in Spain made some comments this morning, oh, well, maybe we should align ourselves more with China. That would be cutting your own throat, because I can tell you that these Chinese exports that the U.S. tariff wall is going to keep out, that China, for all of you who can remember that Disney movie of the brooms carrying the buckets of water, that is the Chinese business model. It never stops. They just keep producing and producing and dumping, and it's going somewhere. And you know, I think, Rob, at the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
Interesting. So he wants to get together with all of our allies and approach them as a group, a trading bloc versus China. Well, Secretary Bessent has been the main spokesperson in this trade war, and he said that this will hurt China more than it will hurt us. Let's take a look.
As I said, we've given 90 days, and the only certainty we can provide is that the U.S. is going to negotiate in good faith, and we assume that our allies will too. And in terms of certainty, we will see what China does. But what I am certain of is that what China is doing will affect their economy much more than it will ours, because they have an export-driven, flood the world with cheap export models, and the rest of the world now understands, because when we put up our tariff wall, those exports were already flowing to the rest of the G7 and to the global south.
And Mr. Secretary, how much of this decision was driven by the bond market cratering overnight? What is happening with bonds? Is China selling their bonds?
I have nothing that says that, and we actually had quite a good 10-year auction today, and all this was, again, this was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along, and that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well.
Very interesting how Secretary Bessent is saying that this was part of Trump's strategy all along. Well, that leaves us to question, what about the other great power, Russia? How are they going to react, and how are they going to be joining the world economy again after all of those sanctions? And could there be more cooperation either between Russia and China, more allying together, or could it be Russia and the United States allying versus China? I'm going to discuss that with Matthew Ehret. But first, let's take a look of President Putin talking about cooperation on a mission to Mars.
Well, there's a person, Elon Musk, who lives in the United States. He's constantly dreaming about Mars, and it's not often that such people are born in the human population who are so obsessed with an idea that seems impossible to many, but which often becomes reality after some time. Just as it happened with the ideas put forward by Korolev, with the space pioneers who built plans that seemed unrealistic to some, but it all came true.
Well, those are not exactly fighting words of the Cold War. It sounds like admiration for a person in the Trump administration, Elon Musk, the largest military contractor, SpaceX. So very interesting. We're going to talk to Matthew Ehret about that relationship soon. Before we go to break, I just want to talk about the great programming that we have on johnmichaelchambers.com. If you don't want to type all that out, you can just go to jmcvoice.com, click on the JMC archives, and check out John's once-a-month show, Conversations of Consequence, where you can see sit-down conversations with thought leaders in our movement, really talking about the meat of the matters, the things that really matter nowadays, and also the military panels once a month. You can see that on JMC Archives, the military panels once a month, interviewing people from different branches of the military in different countries, the United States and Australia, and also Intel and Insights, Juan and John. That's where John picks the brain of Juan O'Savin and really gets that behind-the-scenes perspective of someone who is an intelligence agency contractor. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to Matthew Ehret, the editor of the Canadian Patriot Review.
We are free, we are America.
We are at war, and we must unite in truth. Subscribe for free at johnmichaelchambers.com for my monthly communique, which includes alerts, warnings, announcements, and access to my most valuable resource network to help you to navigate this storm. With your free subscription, you will also receive a digital copy of one of my books, Trump and the Resurrection of America, an Amazon 5-star rated book and 6-star rated by the late Robert David Steele. Won't you join me as we take our country back and redirect humanity on this much-needed course correction? Remain informed, empowered, and connected, and subscribe today at johnmichaelchambers.com.
We are free, we are America.
We are back with Matthew Ehret, the editor of the Canadian Patriot Review. Matt, thanks for coming back on the show. Last week we talked about decoupling with China, something you've written about and something that you think could be beneficial for both countries. And since then we've had a few headlines, a few fighting words on both sides. You know, both sides kind of having a prideful posture about this trade war. China saying they would fight to the end, saying that the United States needs to respect Beijing. We've had President Trump say that if they want to figure this out, they should call us. It's almost like a boyfriend and a girlfriend trying to play hard to get, or trying to act like they don't need the other person in the relationship and expect the other one to come crawling back. So what are your thoughts about some of the developments that we've had? The trade war has not de-escalated in the past week. If anything, it's escalated. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I do hope that my feed is coming through well, and it's a bit choppy coming in on my side. So can you hear me okay right now? It's
Yes, I can.
crisp. Okay, good. Yeah, I generally the messaging that Trump puts forth vocally, and I noticed this a lot in his first term as well, especially before COVID. This idea that ultimately China, USA together could solve most of the world's problems, adding Russia, and I think you got all of the world's problems. That was a big thing. He even began when he said he gave a surprise speech from the Oval Office in 2019, having invited the vice premier of China without notifying the State Department, and all of a sudden holding a press saying that China, Russia, and the USA together should stop investing in the nuclear weapons and pouring billions into things that could kill us, and instead pour that money into things that could do business and make the world a better place. And I've seen that messaging come back again in Trump's second term. However, I need more information before I say that the way that the tariffs are being applied right now are for the best. It has to be done in a very specific way with a certain spirit of mutual development. One of the things that has made China work or develop a functional, very vibrant economy has not simply been, though Westerners often like to think that it's just because they steal stuff from the West and steal ideas that they've been able to excel. Now, that there was a process of copying, but at this point, China has pioneered patents in advanced technologies, from superconductors to, or not superconductors, sorry, quantum computing, AI, magnetic levitation, high-speed railway systems, space tech, in ways that nobody else in the world has even come close to. So they've gone to the place now where they're pioneering. Their economy is not based upon exports, as we are often also told, which is a false image of weakness, that if we don't allow China to export, then they will collapse. Now, the fact is, China has about $450 billion of exports to the USA in 2024. Now, that's a lot of money, but that only 0.7% of their GDP. So 2.7% of their GDP is not very much, and overall, their total exports to the world outside of China is only 20% of their GDP. So that means 80% of China's GDP is built upon their internal markets. Now, on top of that, with the fact that obviously the part of the agenda right now, and it, like I said in my 2020 article, a mutual decoupling could benefit both sides if you do well, and if there's a spirit of the United States restoring a vision of long-term development, like an American Belt and Road, something analogous to what the Belt and Road is as providing a long-term vision in Asia. If something like that were done in North America, that could be a good thing, but it could also be misused in a manner which is destructive to the United States consumer, producer, and overall economy, which I fear is what I see things teetering into, and I see a certain belligerence which is uncalled for from certain figures around Trump, who seem to be thinking that that the tariff can be used to threaten countries like, for example, TSMC, which is the semiconductor manufacturer of Taiwan, to simply install its industries in the United States, including give up its trade secrets, which kind of is an infringement upon the principles of having a free market. That's not the idea of the authentic protective tariff of McKinley, which was based upon the idea of creating an indigenous national capability where there currently is not one, not to threaten other countries and other companies within foreign lands, or let's say Honda, which is a Japanese, get around the tariff by bringing in Japanese workers and building up industries and giving up trade secrets in the United States. That's not necessarily what you would want to do if you were going to do this honestly. So China's much stronger than people realize. I think that Xi Jinping just met with the leadership of Vietnam as well as Cambodia, where they signed deals to advance high-speed rail grids In Vietnam, it's going to be 1,500 kilometers or miles built up that will connect into China and as well as into Taiwan, which is building up a rail grid like we talked about, high speed, that will be connecting into Laos, already built up, and the broader Eurasian corridor system, which again, it's very much based upon a productive, creative orientation, not simply consumerism for its own thing, but rather production and consumerism, which is why their purchasing power parity metrics have risen to $41 trillion in 2024, which is the largest in the world. And now we're at a place where China is I think, at a place where it's very, very well equipped to stand on its own 2 feet, whereas the United States, we spent 60 years, in Canada too, exporting our manufacturing, our productivity, destroying our education system. So I think that we're in a much weaker space if you get around the idea that Wall Street is the metric for economic health. Just ignore that for a bit and look at the real physical prowess and capabilities of the U.S. and the West. It's pathetic, it's pitiful, and it's not something that we're going to, I don't think we need to think much more carefully if we're going to begin to reheal that atrophied system. And I'm not seeing a lot of that yet.
Very interesting take, Matt, and a few data points to throw in there of developments in the past week is that TMIC, I'm not sure, the biggest semiconductor or the most advanced semiconductor manufacturer in Taiwan announced major investments in their factory in Arizona. We're talking about multi-billion dollar investment, and also NVIDIA has made a $500 billion commitment. And we've also seen a new type of, I don't know if it's a license fee for $5 billion a year that would allow NVIDIA to export to China, or how that works exactly, but certainly some type of limitation to them exporting their technology to China. And any thought on those developments? Because it does seem that this is a big part of the equation here, that the U.S. does not want China to get the advanced AI that they can use militarily.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? Like, there was a congressman, I forget which congressman, who was on what's his name? I forget now. But he made a bit of a scandal because he came out stating that the U.S. should bomb TSMC under the condition of any type of conflict that China might have in trying to reacquire Taiwan back into the fold. Taiwan itself being an autonomous province of China, but not recognized as a sovereign national entity by most of the world, including the U.S. State Department itself, which still on its official website still recognizes Taiwan as a part of China. It's a one China policy. It's, I think, only the Vatican and 12 other countries, small countries, that treat Taiwan as if it's its own thing. Now, the problem is that there has been an idea, a very toxic idea, to treat many of those nations of the Pacific as if they were all different types of Ukraine, and set up belligerent military bases and policies and war games and long-range missiles around China's backyard. And Taiwan is no exception to that. They've been doing deals outside of the authorization of Beijing with the U.S. military-industrial complex. They brought in Green Berets. Many Green Berets have been invited in to help weaponize and gear up the Taiwanese for an oncoming war. The Taiwan government itself was large. I mean, it's quite ironic that the same year that the neo-Nazis were used to install a Western-friendly, toxic neo-Nazi government that wanted to get into NATO in Ukraine in 2014, that was the same year that the National Endowment for Democracy also funded the Sunflower Revolution in Taiwan that overturned the KMT government, which by this time in 2014 was actually becoming very friendly to China. And 1 million Taiwanese work on mainland China. They speak Mandarin. A lot of parallels. And that new
bioweapons research labs
regime, all that good stuff, right? So all of these things were brought in. The belligerence around the idea that the Taiwanese have to do everything possible, including going to war with mainland China, with the assistance and support of They're U.S. allies, of course, located 6,000 miles away, whereas China is like 144 kilometers away. That's always a part of it. Now, there's 158,000 U.S. troops, again, around China's perimeter. They're using also the Philippines as a proxy. They got 4 U.S. bases, and it's going to grow in the Philippines. It's dangerous. South Korea is another one. Japan is another one. So I think that a lot of these countries are increasingly waking up to the fact that they are being set up as new disposable peons, but I don't see enough political clout in many of them to push back in a successful way against those who wish to use them, like we've used Ukraine or earlier, Georgia in 2003. So that's a problem. I'd like to see Trump. I'm okay with TSMC setting up shop in Arizona and helping stimulate the U.S. economy, but I'd really want to see it with more of a philosophy of cooperation and making real good business deals. Like we need China on so many levels. They control the vast majority of the rare earths market internationally. China could crush us in a second if they just cut the U.S. off of access to the rare earths market, which they could do if they wanted to, but I don't think they have crush the USA.
This week they did shut off. I believe it was like 4 rare earth minerals that they shut us off from this week as part of the escalation in the trade war. So they're flexing a little bit there as the U.S. is, limiting certain things to them.
Yeah.
So it's already happening. Something else besides the whole idea of collective bargaining, getting all of these potentially European and just many countries, 70 plus countries around the globe, to team up, and basically the U.S. trying to get them to promise not to even trade with China. We've also heard them threatening or trying to get them to say that not only would they not trade with China, that they wouldn't let them use their country to do as a shipping route, as an overland shipping route. So to be able to export to countries that are within that region. So the question, Matt, do you think these are real, permanent aspects of the decoupling, or do you think that this is part of both sides trying to flex and show the leverage that they have of what they could do, and that eventually they'll just reach an amicable deal?
Well, I get the sense that what's in play right now, whether Trump knows it or not, is the Kalergi plan of the 1920s and 30s that called for reorganizing the world around pan-Europe, pan-America, pan-Asia. Basically, what Orwell later on described as Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. That was a later iteration of the same thing. And the idea was to create these spheres of influence centered around an imperial modality of creating local hegemony that would get into a might makes right modality way of thinking. Now that's not something which at the time in the 1920s, when Kalergi, who was the founder of the European Union, later on he was the founder of the Pan-Europa, the Pan-European fascist movement. Otto von Habsburg, for example, was his prodigy, and he designed everything that became the architecture of the euro. At the time, America still had a more living residue of the Abraham and McKinley America that resisted that and recognized that their true interest was in working for the benefit of their neighbor and looking out for your people in a way that was premised around always avoiding war at all costs, at reining in the major capital institutions of Wall Street and the city of London, like breaking up the banks, putting on regulation. That's what Franklin Roosevelt largely had a big role in playing. It was breaking up the banks, putting hundreds of bankers in jail who orchestrated the Great Depression, directing like a Lincoln dirigist type of approach to building up a real economy with the rural electrification, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Hoover Dam, all these big projects, which were based on the idea that all nations should do this as well and should have the right to wield economic control over their national bank, over their destiny, and stand on their own 2 feet. That was the philosophy back then. Now, that didn't work, and instead America was converted into more of like a marcher lord for the city of London and these militarists that wanted to use it to enforce a strategy of Anglo-American hegemony onto the nations of the world. Today, the way I see it, China is largely expressed in a more serious manner, a foreign policy centered around assisting nations to make deals, to have access to advanced technologies, to build up industrial corridors that could deal with their core needs that have been caused by basically living under colonialism, under the IMF, the World Bank, and before that, Western empires for centuries. So they've actually done a much better job, and they've expressed an interest, openly made offers to Canada, to the United States, to work together to purchase U.S. goods from the U.S. to help stimulate the U.S. economy, the real economy to grow, and that was a big part of the Trump-China deal back in 2020. Phase one was supposed to be China was going to purchase $300 billion of U.S. finished goods as part of a new market that would create a demand and attraction for the U.S. to stimulate the rust belts of Michigan, of the Midwest, and other places that have been destroyed by globalization. That was a great idea. And unfortunately, they were rejected on all of their offers. And I think that there's an effort right now to provoke them into going a little bit more feral, more imperial-minded, out of survival by threats. And that's how the oligarchy likes to control everybody under a system of game theory. So the empire controls by game theory. And game theory is like everything. I got to look out for myself, even if it means killing my opponent. No matter what, everybody, I don't have friends. I just have maybe interests that are temporary. And I will kill the interest that I'm currently working with if it becomes expedient to me. That's the way the empires always think. Like Lord Palmerston said,
I agree. That's exactly what's wrong. It's the wrong type of thinking that the military-industrial complex has been purposefully just creating disorder in different regions of the world just so that they don't rise up and cooperate and become powerful, which is so anti-humanity. Just anything to think of all the children who are affected whenever the United States has a policy of just purposefully causing wars and conflict in certain regions. So I'm totally with you there, Matt, that we need more of a spirit of cooperation. And so, I am wondering who on both sides here, because there's a deep state probably on both sides of this conflict. And I think it's also important, if they are going to come to a deal, that there has to be a way for the Chinese side to save face as part of their the way their culture works. And so I've noticed that Trump always says nice things about Xi, right? Xi Jinping. So he has a way of saying, well, they took advantage of us, but it was Joe Biden's fault, and it was our fault because we were stupid, and you can't really blame them, but they've done this wrong, they've done that wrong, but I really respect Xi, and I I get along with them well. So Matt, what I'm trying to get at here is, how do you think this could play out if there is more cooperation? How can there be a decoupling that benefits both sides, that ends up being that it's a win-win-win for everyone, that doesn't have this type of deep state grand strategy of George Orwell, where you have three super states that are constantly at war with each other? Who on the Trump side do you feel is talking about that vision? Who are some of the people in the administration that you've identified that are more cooperative in their rhetoric?
So far, I've only found Trump to be reasonable in his rhetoric and his orientation. Generally speaking, Lutnick maybe a little bit, but what I find what I can speak to is I know what is necessary, like this type of thing that would make it all work. Because at the end of the day, you want a society that's founded upon fair trade, where you're trading fairly with your neighbors and you're trading primarily with high quality products, as well as not just simply raw materials or cheap crap from a country. What you want is parity, some form of parity, where everybody can take care of their own people, what's known as full spectrum economies. So that means you have the agro-industrial capacity to meet all of your needs, whether you're Nigeria, whether you're the United States, whether you're Taiwan, whether you're Russia, that's need. And then after that, any excess product that you produce whether it's, again, food products or whether it's finished goods. And ideally, you want a lot of finished goods that you produce extra that could then be traded fairly on the global marketplace in a way that doesn't treat human beings like the way we treat Congolese miners and kids who earn 25 cents a day working in mines for 12 hours, or even like, sweatshop labor people who earn $1.25, for a hard day's labor to produce stuff that goes to our Dollaramas. You don't want that type of cheap thing, because as McKinley said, cheap goods create cheap people, because those people are not going to have education, high quality infrastructure, advanced technology. And we become addicted to keeping people underdeveloped and hungry so that their labor remains cheap. If you have a high quality laborer, then they will expect more, for their time, and the quality of their output will be much higher. So overall, we want that. And getting protective tariffs that China can use, everybody should be using protective tariffs to care for your people. That's a right. That's part of what just means being a sovereign nation. You use protective tariffs, not simply to generate revenue, but to really build an economy. You have to do it with a spirit of thinking about the future, providing a vision for the people that they can build towards. Like JFK provoked us towards, trying to land a man on the moon, to have a space program that would vitalize and revitalize the whole economy every generation, always going outside of our comfort zone. That's the sort of thing that I see with China and Russia together. They've got a robust vision for deep space cooperation. They've even both offered the USA, which, again, Trump's first term, he accepted it and his Artemis program, his Artemis Accords in 2020 was a great idea, very different from the philosophy of Space Force, and much more based upon the idea of let's mutually develop the abundant resources on asteroids and the moon, and look at Mars towards, a zone that maybe in a few generations we could think of as being a place that some people can call home as we terraform it. Like there's an idea of thinking really big about the universe and about man's relationship to the universe, which China and Russia, they're on a much healthier fast track towards that. And that could be something that Trump and maybe Elon Musk, who I don't trust Elon, but that being said, I think that there's something for the philosophy of going to Mars that I like. That could be the basis of real healing. The Arctic is another one. So those are all things that we could be doing together if this decoupling is a healthy thing. Like decoupling from China selling us cheap stuff and us exporting raw materials to the China market to be turned into useful goods. Like that's not the type. That's more like a drug.
There's been a predatory.
It's not a real.
There's been a kind of a predatory relationship on both sides, whether it's using our currency or using the industrial capacity. On either side, there seems to be some unhealthy relationship economically that we could, as you said, healthily decouple, but then also cooperate in specific ways. So I like that, Matt. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what Putin said in the video in the opening monologue, where he's showing admiration for Elon Musk and saying we can cooperate on missions to Mars and so forth. We've got the ambassador working out possible peace deals with Putin. They had a 5-hour meeting. They created a specific plan for lasting peace with Ukraine. So things are happening there. Could it be that Russia and the United States actually become allies? What are your thoughts on the relationship between Russia and the United States in the future?
Well, we need this orientation to work out and not be sabotaged. But I definitely support what Witkoff has been orienting towards. And I mean, I think he made the point that the U.S. supports Russia's claims over Lugansk and Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson. He made the point that if we don't fully support those claims, and he did acknowledge that it was a legal plebiscite, a vote, which those people living in those regions did when they wanted to go back to Russia, then if we don't do that, there won't be a solution. He also they've been also alluding to the fact, and it seems like there's some back channels already in play right now, that are looking at a figure named Mykola Azarov, who is the former prime minister of Ukraine under Poroshenko, and he's currently in exile living in Moscow under FSB protection. But they're looking at him as a very possible, and I would say probable figure to be installed in Ukraine as sort of a bridge, a peacemaker between the West and Russia sooner than later. And he's the head of the co-chair of the People's Unity Party. So again, he's living in Russia. He's been calling for peaceful reconciliation, reviving the type of peace deals that were attempted in April of 2022, right after the special military operation was begun, and was thus and came out like a giant success. They were actually totally in agreement. The war was going to be over, and unfortunately, the head negotiator of that team on the Ukrainian side was soon murdered, and the whole thing kind of was forgotten, and we went back to war fighting for another 2 years. So this is a figure who's for reviving that strategy, for calling for a permanent buffer zone, a permanent claim to neutrality and not joining NATO, which is good. It's great. It's fantastic. I don't know to what degree the rest of the Europeans are. I don't know how much clout they have. They currently are. The European Commission around Ursula von der Leyen is not very happy. Kallas, who's an Estonian freak, a deputy head of the European Commission, she's pissed. She's even threatened Vucic and every European head of state, saying that if anybody goes to Russia for Victory Day, celebrating the victory against Nazism, then they might disqualify for continued membership in the European Union, or not being allowed to join the European Union, which is fine, actually great. I mean, it's great if you're Vucic. You're like, well, why would we want to join the Titanic? It's already sinking. So I think that Trump.
Yes, all the heads of states of Europe have been sabotaging the peace process. We've had Macron calling Zelensky every day. We've had Germany and France and other countries basically say, hey, fine, we don't need the United States. We're going to raise money and buy arms and continue this fight ourselves. I can't believe the arrogance. Maybe it's, like I said before, in the trade war, maybe it's just posturing so that they can try to do an amicable deal. But it seems pretty serious. So let's just say, that this peace process does work out. The fighting stops. How could the relationship between Russia and the United States evolve, and really heal what's happened with the sanctions and cutting Russia out of the international order? How could that be reconciled, and how could we move forward as allies?
You got to start doing deals, business deals, and that's the best way to start a trust building process, is through the economy. And I mean, Putin just said everything's on the table, space, but also the Arctic. Putin, has made the Arctic a very high priority for Russia's future. The Far East and Arctic development is a huge priority for everything Russia is doing. The Northwest Passage is supposed to increase through shipping traffic. It's been increasing every single year, but by a factor of 5-fold by 2030. It's a big part of the Chinese Polar Silk Road initiative. India is also very invested in the Russian Arctic, as is Japan. It's a point of, as we can see, if there's so much development in this zone. Most of Russia is highly underpopulated, kind of like the Canadian Arctic. They've done a better job than Canada, but still it's similar in the sense of it's maybe 20 million people living in this giant region in the east of Russia, like 80% of the territory, right? Most people live west, closer to Europe. So that's a zone where Sergei Shoigu has made a point that he wants to build 5 new advanced, modernized cities tied to integrated with high-speed rail corridors, that the Trans-Siberian line will be beefed up and added. Another line will be added to it that will go through Mongolia. There's a Trans-Mongolian connecting Russia to China through another artery. And it's a point where if you get people who are political rivals to begin to work first on business contacts, business relations, that will then create a change in climate on the political scene that will allow for dialogue and discourse to happen that currently cannot happen. So I think that the same thing would have to occur for the sake of, Russia and Alaska. You got to get there's some wonderful dynamics and openings that could base themselves around the Bering Strait Rail. Elon Musk recently floated a short video promoting the Bering Strait as a zone of cooperation between East and West. That's a great idea. It's been around for over a century as a concept. I think it's actually one of the most important ideas that have been shaping world events for a very long time. And its time, I believe, has come. It would just require that you have a different philosophy than that which we see expressed by a figure like Mark Carney, who has also doubled down, saying that under no circumstance will he as Prime Minister ever permit Canada to participate in any type of Arctic economic cooperation with Russia or the USA, which simply sort of solidifies Canada's historic role that you and I have talked about in many of our chats throughout the years as a wedge by the British Empire designed to keep and prevent any U.S.-Russian cooperation from emerging.
Right, exactly. They have that geography to be able to prevent, for example, a rail line from Russia to connect with the United States, continental United States. Yeah, it's fascinating, and that Putin actually said openly whenever Zelensky backed out of the mineral deal, the rare earth mineral deal with the United States. Putin said, "Hey, by the way, Trump, we've got more rare earth minerals than Ukraine has, and we're looking for business partnerships." So that's interesting. That continued openness from Putin to collaborate and to have diplomacy. And what we've seen is a stark contrast from Biden. Now Trump is actually willing to negotiate with Russia, but also with Iran. So there are negotiations happening right now with Iran. Of course, we've got the big issue of nuclear. Basically, the United States holding a very red line here that they should not develop nuclear capabilities, and then Iran saying, well, that's not even on the table. Of course, we have a sovereign right to do that. So what are your thoughts here on this situation? Because it's certainly been a powder keg here in the Middle East, with Israel saying for a very long time that they want to do a direct hit to Iran and do regime change. So what are your thoughts about the Iran negotiations?
Yeah, and I would add the Saudi civilian nuclear negotiations too, which simultaneously you have the U.S. I don't know if it was Witkoff or if it was somebody else who was part of the negotiating team that just made a point that they want to assist Saudi Arabia in their aspirations to develop a robust civilian nuclear energy capacity, which is important. And Israel, Livid, who was livid, was the former prime minister of Israel for 2 seconds. He gave a speech saying this is unacceptable. Saudi Arabia must never allow Israel will never allow Saudi Arabia to access nuclear energy, even civilian nuclear energy. And in the case of Witkoff, he gave a speech after the backdoor or back channel negotiations in Oman with Iran. He made a point. Yeah, we're not against Iran developing a lot of civilian nuclear energy. That's their right to do it. I liked generally the line, and again, he might be taking a bit of a hardline approach vocally, but I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. He said, as long as it's being enriched by a maximum of 3.9% uranium enrichment and not 60 or 90%, which is, I think you need 93% or something to make it nuclear grade enrichment. And Iran isn't that close to that. But that being said, he made it clear that it is encouraged and it is good for Iran to have nuclear power. So I like that type of language. Unfortunately, it's still cusped within a pretty arrogant tone, which is not going to be well received by those in Iran, which does have quite a strong military, and sees itself, rightfully so, as a sovereign nation, and as a sovereign nation should have the right to have their own nuclear, deterrence. Every country that we know that gave up their nuclear deterrence, whether it was Iraq or whether it was Libya, that caved into pressure saying, hey, just give up your nuclear deterrence and you'll have a lot of economic abundance. Well, they did it, and then what happened to them? They both systematically got regime changed and destroyed. North Korea also had a lot of pressure to get rid of their nuclear deterrence. They didn't get regime changed. So I think Iran kind of smells where the wind's blowing. They know that the ideologues who are pushing for a greater Israel agenda, which involves massive regime change over pretty much every country surrounding Israel and the expansion of Israeli territory to become something that looked a lot like the Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian map. If you look at the actual dimensions of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, it's pretty much exactly what the greater Israel map looks like today. And it does involve.
I think that gives you an idea. It's not really. It's not,
and there are certain.
Sorry, Matt. I think that's a very interesting insight there, that perhaps we're not dealing with the people who have a sincere Jewish faith and allegiance that want to have that greater Israel.
Sorry, can you repeat that? You cut out on my side a little bit. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah, I just find that fascinating that the greater Israel lines up with the Babylonian map, and that to me that hints at the idea that it's not actually sincere Jewish faith holders in Israel that want to have that type of territory.
No, I think that there's something insidious, something dark under the surface of something trying to persuade the world that it has a Jewish veneer, but it's something a little bit darker in its inner core. And I think most Jews have no idea. They're good people, and they don't realize what might be looking under the surface. In the same way that many Christians are not aware that there are forces acting Christian, but in their inner core tied to the exact same satanic mystery cult that was running amok in the ancient world. And converting things like Rome from a republic into an empire and spreading itself as a global hegemon. It's the same thing. It's totally connected. Though it acts Christian on the surface in words, in reality, in its heart of hearts, it is satanic, and it's a mystery religion. You have similar things, wearing skin suits that look Muslim but actually are satanic, though they say on the surface that they're Muslim. So it's the same thing with the Zionist groupings as well. And I think, when you look at the way they define the Solomon's Temple, which they seem obsessed with rebuilding a third time in order to usher in some form of a eschatological sort of new age, a new purgative violence that will usher in sort of the birth of a new type of humankind that's never existed. They have an idea of Solomon's Temple that's not the Solomon from the Bible, but it's a much more dark version of what they think Solomon is. And I get that from reading the writings of people like Sir Charles Warren, who was the Grand Mason who oversaw the Quattuor Coronati Lodge and a close ally of King Edward the Seventh, who orchestrated World War I. And that Charles Warren had the belief that Solomon's Temple was actually a site of ancient pagan human sacrifice. And, that's sort of, I think, what certain nefarious actors believe that they're recreating is a center of global human sacrifice that animated the religious structures of ancient Babylon. So that's a problem. That I think that there's too many people who haven't identified the fallacy around Trump, even, like Pete Hegseth. Freaks me out. That guy's mentality kind of freaks me out because he's really on board with that. He's called for rebuilding the third Solomon Temple, and I don't think he has a clue.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I don't think he's part of the deep, dark inner circle of true believers of some type of darker thing. I think he's one of the evangelicals that has gone along with this idea that the Israel, this modern state of Israel, is somehow related to the biblical Israel. So. Interesting insights, Matt. I really appreciate your spirit of peace that you're trying to promote here with your advocacy and your activism and sharing your knowledge all around the world. You're traveling to Asia now. You're doing great work. You and your wife are creating documentaries and different things. So where can people go to find your work and learn more?
Yeah, they can go to CanadianPatriot.org, or they can go to RisingTideFoundation.net, or finally my Substack, which gets people access to all my books as PDFs, or they can buy hard copies too. It's MatthewEhret.substack.com, and all the videos are there too.
Thank you so much, Matt, for all that you do. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. I think this is such an important topic to really think long and hard about our role as Americans and our role as America in the global order of the future. Will we continue to be what we have been since World War II, the global police with military bases around the world, trying to keep order and trying to control and micromanage the world, or will we be a regional power? Are we going to control the Western Hemisphere with Greenland and the 51st state and the Panama Canal? And will we be going interplanetary, and will we be cooperating, or will we be the empire that's expanding to another planet, perhaps? These are the questions that we have to define for ourselves, and that we have to decide as a political movement of what we believe in. And I think that we all truly do believe in America first. We believe in solving our own problems at home first, solving the homelessness, solving so that we have a living wage and we can raise a family on one or two incomes, so that we're not tax slaves. I think that's something that we can all agree on, that we need to use our power and our influence and our prosperity at home first and take care of American citizens. And I see that happening. I see that unfolding. I think it's beautiful to see each day the Trump administration hinting, and maybe more than hinting, at the removal of income taxes and the removal of property taxes and the removal of so many of these chains that have kept us enslaved to a beast system. And so we will see what the golden age holds for us, but we're really a part of that decision of whether we want to use that power for good or for evil. So thank you for watching 40,000 Foot View. Make sure that you check out the links in the description below, our Rumble channel where you can find Josh Reed's deep dives and JMC's various monthly shows. You can also find Matthew Ehret's website there as well, CanadianPatriot.org. Thank you, all you patriots. God bless, and good night.